one and all present here. Today, on this auspicious occasion of 72nd Foundation Day of Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur, we are hosting the debate competition. On behalf of IIT Kharagpur, I warmly welcome you all to this event. Today, we have with us students and faculty members who have taken participation in this debate competition, and they are going to share their views on the topic, globalization has done more harm than good. So, today, a team of students consists of Ashley Placid, the second year undergraduate student, Sneha Dash, the second year undergraduate student, and Anirudh Murli, the second year undergraduate student, those who are going to speak in favor of the topic. Next, a team of 3 faculty members consists of Professor Manjira Sinha from the Center of Excellence for Artificial Intelligence, Professor Shibayan Roy from the Material Science Center, and Professor Sanjay Gupta from the Department of Mechanical Engineering, those who are going to speak against the topic. So please have a huge round of applause for these participants. So I hope it is going to be very exciting to see what they are going to put forth in front of, in favor of and against the topic. So now I would like to introduce the judges for today's competition. Professor Prabina Raji from the Vinod Gupta School of Management, Professor Pallab Dasgupta from the Department of Computer Science and Engineering, and Mr. Brahmjot Singh, the Vice President of Technology Students, Gymkhana. Next, I would like to request the moderator of today's event, Professor Anandru Bhattacharya from the Department of Mechanical Engineering, to continue this session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Rituparna. And respected audience, both within the auditorium as well as the ones who are watching it online, guests on this auspicious occasion of the Institute Foundation Day, respected judges, my dear colleagues, my dear students, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to an event which is highly anticipated through the year. It's the annual Foundation Day debate between the faculty and students, where they present their views and exchange their views on a topic of current global relevance. And that topic for today is globalization. It's probably not an understatement if I state that each one of us are influenced by globalization in every single day of our lives. To give you an example, my daughter uses a smartphone with a Korean brand, but most likely that was manufactured in some factory in China or Malaysia or maybe in India. It has a microprocessor from an American multinational, and there's innovations that were conceived and developed in design centers across the world, maybe in Mexico, Taiwan, Israel, or India. That's the connected world we are talking about. Talk about your automobiles, talk about your healthcare equipments. The similarities are there. So therefore, as we conceive, design, and build the world's finest products, today we are almost using everywhere. We are leveraging the expertise that is available across the world, and which is also enabling us to sell it at the correct, affordable price point. It's true that globalization has given to an overall upliftment in global economy. It has opened up doors. It has improved quality of life. But is everything really that hunky-dory? And the answer, unfortunately, is no. Because if you introspect and think about the other impact of globalization, they are too conspicuous to overlook or ignore. It's true that globalization has improved global economy, but at the same time, that improvement has not, there has been a disparity. Okay? It has led to displacement of jobs from one part of the world to another. In this connected world, a small local perturbation has had its ripples felt across the globe for sustained periods. You talk about the financial meltdown of 2008, or the Fukushima nuclear tragedy of 2011 that sent shivers down the spine of the entire automotive industry, not just in Japan, but in Europe, South Asia, and North America. It has also, in many cases, unnecessarily intervened with the local, social, economic, and cultural fabric of a place. We have seen cities, because of unplanned growth, burst at the seams. So therefore, then it brings the question, then has globalization done more harm than good? And I think we don't have a definite answer. And that's the topic of the debate today, ladies and gentlemen. In the opinion of the House, globalization has done more harm than good. Speaking for the motion is our dear students, the student team, comprising of Ashley Placid, Sneha Dash, and Anirudh Murli, all students of second year. And speaking against the motion, which is speaking in favor of globalization, are my faculty colleagues, Professor Manjira Sinha, Professor Sanjay Gupta, and Professor Shibayon Roy. The judges, Professor Prabina Rajiv, former Dean and Professor of, which is Vinod Gupta School of Management, Professor Pallab Dasgupta, Professor of Computer Science, and former Dean R&D of this institute, and finally, your own VP, Mr. Ramjot Singh, sorry. So without further ado, we will get started. The round one is the conventional debate round, where each of the teams, the speakers from each of the teams will take turns and present their views within 5 minutes. I will ring a bell at the end of 4.5 minutes, which should be an indication that you have to wrap up your thoughts, okay? So let's get started, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, put your hands together for the participants and the judges. After that, we'll start. So I request the first speaker from the student team to please go ahead and start your presentation. Your time starts now.
The world's inequalities have never grown faster than they've grown today. Millions of people are evicted every single year for grandiose development projects. Millions of people are systematically deprived of basic rights that you and I could not imagine living without, like the right to education, the right to basic healthcare, the right to have a workspace where you're not exploited every second of the day. Multinational corporations have acquired increased power in the last decades through things like the liberalization of trade, investment flows, high interdependency of the world's economies, but also things like foreign debt, the policies of financial institutions like the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, the IMF, which were largely run by developed countries, but affect those who do not have a say in it, i.e. developed countries. This restrains the ability of states to fulfill their human rights obligations. The proponents of human rights, the defendants of human rights are often drowned out by loud PR campaigns by the companies that they seek to call out in the first place. Communities struggle to get justice for the wrongdoings on the economic, social, and cultural things, as Sir has already pointed out, because of globalization. It is this systemic attack on our collective human dignity that we regret as students, and hence we stand for this motion before the House today. First things first, we're going to set the burdens real quick. Let's be clear here about what this motion is asking us to debate. The motion reads, in the opinion of the House, globalization has done more harm than good. What does this ask us as students to defend? It asks us to show that the harms that accrue from globalization are significantly worse than any of the benefits that opposition is going to talk about. Opposition has to do the reverse. But given the wording of this motion, it is not sufficient for us as students to just tell you what's gone wrong. Neither is it sufficient for our honorable opposition to just come forward and say what has gone right. There must be a comparative drawn, i.e., take the harms of one side, take the benefits of the other side, weigh them up against each other. Likely the team that does a better job of this today is probably the one that deserves to win this debate. Given that this is out of the way, I'm going to move on to my constructive argument on the grounds of human rights violation. Uncle Ben once said, with great power comes great responsibility, but it seems like MNCs have missed the memo on that. MNCs have tremendous amount of power given to them by globalization, but that has not been matched by the obligations on the grounds of human rights. Businesses continue to exploit people on a daily basis to drive profit margins. Why do they do this? Because MNCs have a unique incentive that's given to them by globalization to push for the lowest price. Why is this the case? Because when you push for the lowest price, you're pushing for the lowest production cost. When you do that, because you get access to new markets, you get to drive out competition by offering lower prices that those local companies cannot compete with, which means that you gain more of a market share, you push towards monopolization, you get control, you get power, you get more power to carry this on in other economies. It is a toxic cycle that self-perpetuates. This means that these MNCs have huge incentive to use their existing power to undermine the very basic principles of human rights that we all hold sacred here. What does this look like? A few ways. Firstly, the right to equality and dignity is lost through poor health and safety conditions for workers in developing countries that nobody in this room would put up with if it was put forward to them. Secondly, the rights to health, food, and shelter, particularly through the imposition of trade barriers, but also examples like in Africa where there's very little land for people to actually grow food, which is why there's so much starvation. Whatever little land is available is often used to create export crops, which is frankly disgusting. Thirdly, the right to work, where many laborers are told, if you do not cut your wages, we're going to move your entire industry abroad. Since these people do not have transferable skills, they're either forced to take massive pay cuts, which do not match the cost of living for people who already live hand to mouth, or they go unemployed. Fourthly, the right to protect against harmful forms of work and exploitation like child and slave labor is often undermined because these governments have incentives to keep their foreign investors happy, but their foreign investors only came because of these exploitative practices. Everyone in this room would agree that exploitation for capital is not ideal, yet nobody prosecutes this. Why? Because globalization gives these companies two unique ways to protect themselves from this. Firstly, excessive amounts of money and power means that they can lobby politicians into doing their bidding for them and hide behind that veil by going ahead and funding their party. And this is even worse in third world countries, because third world countries do not even have the mechanisms necessary to check on this power. But secondly, on legality, because it is extremely difficult to prosecute Nestle for having slave labor in multiple countries when their office is situated in the United States. Lastly, I'm going to touch on a bit of weighing here, because as I stated, it is very important that we draw a comparative with what the other team is positing here today. Debates are won on weighing by drawing a direct comparative with the other side. The comparative from us is quite simple. The global poor here do not care if globalization is giving us state-of-the-art technology or all the facilities opposition wants to talk about, when the same system has systematically deprived them of food, water, shelter, but most importantly, their dignity. Human rights are what make us all human. They are the principles by which we create the sacred home for human dignity. To deprive people of their dignity is to deprive them of what it means to be human. And we think that this harm is more grave than any of the benefits that they bring, and hence we urge you to vote for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Very charged up, very emotional, and talking about rights and dignity of labor. Okay, I would now request the first speaker from the faculty team. Please go ahead and present your motion. Shibayan.
Thank you, moderator. And thanks for explaining the meaning of globalization. It's actually saved a couple of seconds from my talk. So thanks a lot for that. As you rightly pointed out, globalization is a connectivity, and that's how I like to define it. A connectivity where a local event actually affects everyone in the globe. But I don't know, so first possibly we have to define globalization and context, time period and all, and that's what I will try to do, and that will help my next speakers. So are we living in an age of globalization? Is it happening for the first time? I don't think so. So globalization, as I said, that connectivity between people, a local event, and that sort of affects everyone, happens many a times before. So if you take this prehistoric time, the modern humans coming out of Africa and spreading all around, globalization. If you take the invasion of Alexander and spread of Hellenistic culture, globalization. If you take, for example, Columbus discovering New World, globalization. If you take colonial powers taking all over the world, globalization. And how? I will give you an example. A king died in Austro-Hungarian king died in Europe, caused a world war, and introduced people in India the first time that they didn't produce a single thing. And they first introduced to this concept of inflation. That is what is globalization. But for the time being, we will take, I think we better take the context of India in this to discuss, and the time period from 90 onward. That's what the globalization to us and for my co-speakers. Now, point is, globalization is extremely subjective. In fact, if I could, I would sit in that side and talk in favor of globalization. I found that with the students, the difference is our dress exactly matches. I only have this blue stripes in my dress, and so our thoughts. So I could possibly sit in this side and talk about globalization against it. So it is extremely subjective. And as I said, time will only tell you that whether globalization is going to be good or bad. For example, when Columbus discovered New World, half the, or more than half, population, native population wiped out. But if you look at your diet, most of the things that you eat, vegetables and fruits, actually have come out from that New World. That's what. So it's extremely subjective. So I'll take up a test case to prove that possibly this comparison, and who could be better a test case than my own life, possibly. So the story goes, I will tell you a story. Story starts with my father. He belongs to a very small village in this West Bengal. Went all the way to Kolkata to finish his master's in Kolkata University by the late 60s. Mathematics, he was doing mathematics, master's in mathematics, did extremely well there. But due to family restrictions, he actually had to take up a small job in one small town school in West Bengal. But that's not the story. The story is, many years later, I was abroad and I was trying to pursue him to visit me and see. And he was like reluctant and saying me, what new I am going to see there? I'm seeing everything through you. You are sending photographs. I'm seeing it in the web. I'm seeing it in TV. What new? So in order to convince him, I said, come, see. You will be all around by white people. That's something you don't see normally. He said, you know what? When I was a student, I was a fan of Hollywood movies. And I used to wonder how those people are, how those places are, and how they live their life. So I said that you were so good in studies, you could pursue and you could come to these countries and success, you could make it your dream fulfilled. He says, at those times, the dreams are so unreal, so absurd, that I even dare to dream. Cut to 20 years, his 8-year son, that is me. By around the late 80s, I was watching cartoons in Disney. Mickey Mouse was my favorite. I came to a magazine, famous magazine I read, Anandamala, which many people remember, our window to the outside world. I read a cover story about Disneyland and a particular place in Disneyland called Epcot Center. 25 years later, I was standing in front of that Epcot Center, taking photographs exactly how it was shown in that cover story, and I was just comparing, my dream is fulfilled. That's what globalization did to our generation. It gives us this wing, the Indians, to fulfill their dream. And now this father is promising his kids that someday he will take them to Disneyland. So it gives us this way how to fulfill our dreams, how we can be connected to this entire world and can roam around the entire world. Nothing is impossible. So with that message, I of course rest my case, and I think my colleagues will extend this further. Thank you.
Thank you, Shibayan, putting forward your point through your personal story. I would now request Mr. Anirudh from the students team to present his views as the next speaker from the student team.
Yes, sir. I'd like to begin in 3, 2, 1. Yeah, so sir actually put forward very good points of how globalization means connectivity, right? And so everyone here, everyone in the audience, the panel, the honorable opposition, my own benchmates, I'd like to actually propose why exactly this connectivity, this definition of globalization being connectivity makes the debate fall on our side, right? So first of all, globalization means connectivity. Where? In markets, right? First of all, globalization is an integration of markets by definition itself, it causes economies to be linked, right? Any instability, any recession in any one market means that it's going to cascade to every market in the world because every market is integrated, right? What is this impact going to be, right? Number one, it's going to have a very big impact on developing countries' economies because developing countries by nature have very weak local markets, right? In crisis, the investors who invest in these local markets, they see these local markets as the riskiest places to invest, and so they withdraw their investments first from these local markets. What does that mean? It means that development stops here when there is any slight wind of any recession or any impact having taken place here, right? And to bring these investors back who actually went back, these countries need to actually impose tight fiscal policies, else they get into debt, right? What is going to be its impact on the poor people? Their effects is going to be almost permanent because these poor people do not have any capital whatsoever to actually bounce back in times of this kind of a recession, right? Example, 1995, Mexico. It is a time of a fiscal recession, right? And there were abundant child labor practices in Mexico that was largely because of globalization policies that were rushed into by the United States government and the WTO and many other cases, right? And this actually what happened was it cut enrollment in schools, but after growth in about 1997, the enrollment in schools did not actually bounce back. Children were still under forced labor, child labor still continued, right? And that is the effect on poor people. They cannot really bounce back. The effects of this kind of a recession is permanent in poor people, right? The second thing, I'd like to talk about what happens if there is a devaluation or an inflation, right? It makes people, rich people, move their assets out of the country. What does that mean? It means that banks who depend on these rich people's investments in them do not have any more funds to actually give out loans, and so banks fall into debt, especially in our fractional reserve banking system, and now the government has to bail them out, right, using taxpayers' money. And where does taxpayers' money come from? It comes from the poor people, it comes from middle class people, it also comes from the rich people. But more so, because of rich people having to take their money out of banks, making the bank fall into debt, because of rich people, now the poor people and the middle class people have to make up the debt, right? Number three, high interest rates are used to stabilize currencies, right? It hurts small enterprises, it hurts these people who work in these small enterprises. Number four, pressure to liberalize markets, which is a major thing that globalization actually brings in, right? Because understand that every developed country, every country in the WTO, every country in the World Banks, every country in the IMF, all these countries who actually control these policies push for liberal markets, push for open markets, right? And they are almost always biased, usually rich countries, right? And there is no mechanism for creating opportunities with regulation, creating opportunities with oversight. There is literally no mechanism, right? And so they use the WTO to pressure developing countries as such to actually open their markets without any mechanism inside to protect their own economies, right? Example, the 1990s crisis again, India and China were closed markets. They had very little repercussions in their markets in these 1990s fiscal crisis. But in Argentina, Thailand, Mexico, these are open markets, forced by the US, forced by the rich countries, right? And they had very bad economic, they had very bad hitings on their markets, and this sheer scale and magnitude is again going to come forth, and this should never happen, right? Because it has a very bad impact on poor people, it has a very bad impact on most people in this world, and that is when any benefits put forward by technology coming forth, any benefits put forward by any kind of technology or any kind of connection is going to weigh badly against this kind of sheer scale and magnitude of a problem that is coming forth due to globalization, right? And so I'd also like to introduce some bigger inequalities that come forth, and my time is up, so my third speaker will continue it. Thank you everyone for listening to me. I'd like to respect you.
Thank you, Anirudh. I would now request Professor Sanjay Gupta, the next speaker from the faculty team, to kindly present his views.
Hello, is it working?
Your time starts now.
Thank you, moderator Professor Bhattacharya. Globalization is the integration of national economy and culture with that of global standards. In this process, a country throws open its gates, welcoming in international trade, communication, capital investment, technological developments, cultural practices from foreign countries. India's massive economic growth is largely due to globalization, which was a transformational change since early 1990s. Thereafter, the country's GDP has grown at an exponential rate. Globalization has presented an unprecedented opportunity for growth and expansion in India in major sectors such as industry, finance, agriculture, education and research, healthcare, and finally, information technology and data sciences. Now, let me just briefly state some highlights in the industrial sector. There has been a massive influx of both foreign capital investment and multinational corporations expanding within India, particularly in the manufacturing sector, pharmaceuticals, chemical and petrochemical industries, to name a few. They brought with them not only the capital, but also advanced technologies and processes that has eventually helped Indian industry to modernize. As compared to the days of ambassadors and Fiats of the pre-globalization era, we now see new variants of cars from top manufacturers of the world every year. Let us move to the agricultural sector. India has primarily been an agricultural-based country, where majority of the population is directly or indirectly dependent on agricultural sector for their livelihood. With globalization, the farmers have been exposed to technological developments in agriculture, and eventually it has led to exponential growth in crop production, food processing, and preservation, as well as distribution across the nation. We can declare that India is self-reliant in agriculture, as is evident even during the pandemic days when all sectors almost came to an halt. Let us move to the education and research sector. Globalization had a profound influence on the education sector. Foreign universities are actively collaborating with Indian universities in form of joint collaborative projects, student exchange, joint degrees, as is evident in this institute as well. Now, the Indian education system has embraced globalization through a rapid growth of information technology. Globalization promoted new tools of e-learning, distance education program, and overseas training. Like many other schemes, the government has evolved with the new education policy, as you can see, where students of different disciplines are exposed to education and training at the global standards. I have no hesitation in stating that the world recognizes India as a massive talent or a massive pool of intellect available at their disposal. The confidence of the world is in establishing corporate sector R&Ds in India, like GE, John F. Wells Research Center, SABIC, Unilever, Boeing, and Airbus, to name a few. It is also worth mentioning that globalization has helped India to emerge as a global leader in information technology and data sciences. That would be elaborated by my co-speaker, Manjeer. May I now try to conclude by saying that globalization in India resulted in creation of an affluent middle class who can not only afford better quality of living standards, but can also access high-quality medical treatments available at their disposal. Truly, globalization has made the world a small place, a whole lot of different people interconnected in diverse ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gupta. Very eloquently and clearly put forward his views. And to counter that, we have the last speaker from the student team, Ms. Sneha Dash. Sneha, your time starts now.
So in my speech, what I'm going to do is go ahead and talk about what the major clashes have been in today's debate and weigh the harms and benefits that both sides have talked about and show you why globalization has essentially done more harm than good. So what is the first major clash that comes in this debate? The global spread of newer technology or inventions versus more vulnerable people having lower qualities of life, loss of jobs due to this exact technologies we are talking about. So let us analyze this on multiple levels. First of all, the likelihood of both the impacts. Why is it so likely that the poorest people will be the ones most hurt due to globalization? We showed you with proper mechanization in all our speeches as to how globalization has essentially made colonialism work from home. Firstly, on a global level, some of the poorest countries are generally unable to diversify their manufacturing industries, and hence they see the prices of the commodities that they export at the global level drop significantly, and they are stuck in vicious cycles of unstable export. Hence, they are not even able to facilitate the meeting of basic resources for their own country people. Secondly, what is the role of richer countries in this? Political constraints in rich and powerful countries dominate the design of global trade rules. US and European countries will protect their own markets to serve the interests of their own producers, which locks out many developing countries from potential markets. They will set up complicated negotiations, and in case of disputes, whenever there is a talk about resolution, it puts the countries with limited resources, such as limited legal resources, at a disadvantage. Also, financial organizations such as the World Trade Organizations have no real accountability to the citizens of the developing countries, while the policies that they make affect these countries the most. So how did the poor then come to have significantly lower qualities of life? We talked about the following reasons. Globalization is driven by MNCs and their insanely high productivity standards. They look towards developing countries for both market and cheap labor. Understand the uniqueness of these MNCs is that they enjoy immense power to both shape the markets and influence the supply chains, thereby pressurizing developing countries to relax labor laws to serve their own interests. This leads to poor working conditions for all kinds of workers, especially those who are the most dispensable and the most vulnerable. The smaller businesses do not have that much capital or technical know-how to go ahead and openly compete with these large MNCs. Thus, not only do these MNCs take away a large portion of their market share, but also have a unique lobbying power to secure economically important land and other resources for their own projects, thus making it more difficult for the local businesses to do so. In that process, you go ahead and destroy so many traditional livelihoods. So even if we take them at their best case, wherein the technology spreads globally uniformly, the most vulnerable stakeholders still lose even more than they did before globalization. They were already oppressed systematically through colonization, and that is what is continuing through the process of globalization. The people who enjoyed power previously still do and have zero incentives to work for a more equitable global economy. Now, why is it that the benefits that they claim less likely? It is important to understand who is responsible for the distribution of this technology. They are generally not available to the lowest strata of the society. Insofar as your benefits do not trickle down to the ones most in need of it, the ones you have wronged the most, the harms that we talk about clearly take over. Also, when you talk about going to abroad and taking education, understand the global market for skilled and talented people is another illustration of the asymmetrical effect of markets. obviously, an IITian from here can go and work in the Silicon Valley. But does that ensure that similar robust systems get developed in these countries? Does that ensure that these people who are necessary for such kind of policy making, who are important resources for their own country, remain there and make them to do so? Therefore, sure, this may create incentives for the Indian government to invest some more on education, but again, who exactly has the instruments to provide instruments for the same? So it is so the expectation of quality of services has increased, and hence the demand for more qualified people have increased, but the people who are able to get access to become such qualified in the first place has remained non-uniform. And for all these reasons, we are very proud to propose this motion.
Thank you, Sneha. Now we will have the last speaker from the faculty team, Professor Monjira Sinha. Your time starts now.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I will stick to the India use case because it is a case that we can relate to, and it is a case that is representative. And I want to talk about two personal stories, two personal milestones that also coincided with two major globalization-driven impacts on Indian economic growth and job market. When I started my undergraduate engineering study in the early 2000, it was the peak of Indian IT boom. Before this time, jobs after graduating meant very few campus placements and a lot of struggle via competitive exam outside. And now, for the first time, we started hearing terms like 100% campus placements, and also at a much high salary to start with. Courtesy to globalization and outsourcing of IT and related services to India. Between 1994 and 2008, this sector has witnessed a 40-fold growth, and now it contributes to 7.4% of our GDP, which is our education and health budget combined. These jobs offered a better lifestyle and independence for the young graduates at their early 20s. Moreover, these benefits of this job was not only limited to the coveted disciplines of CS and IT. Graduates from other branches and domains of education also secured these outsourced jobs in terms of call centers to music editing. The second milestone was during the growth of services and data analytics industry in the second decade of 2002 onward. Before that, PhD meant only a career in academia with a very few R&D jobs offered by few industry and tech giants. With the increasing globalization of Indian economy, more companies started to set up their R&D bases in places like Bangalore, the Silicon Valley of India, Pune, and Hyderabad. As a result, it opened up entirely new industry job markets for the aspiring researchers. And today, this is the dream destinations for the undergraduate and the postgraduate as well. Now, India currently holds almost 35 to 50% of this particular industry, and by NASSCOM estimate by 2025 it will be $16 billion, which is a whopping 32% of the global economy. And this is one sector that has witnessed job growth despite the global economic downturn during the pandemic. But this success story is not only restricted to India. In 2021, this industry has saw a significant 26.5% year-over-year growth, and this was made possible due to the high quality and low cost design flexibility offered by globalization. We have also seen this export and efficient integration of technology due to globalization in the rapid procurement of things like COVID-19 vaccines. Now, before globalization in 1991, India's GDP was 5.3% at per annum growth. And now we are talking about double-digit GDP growth and a $5 trillion economy. The Indian middle class is now greater than the US middle class, and the aspiring lifestyle of this class has led to the growth of auxiliary services, gig and platform economics, and in turn has generated more jobs. Now, when we talk about globalization, it has made the communication better, faster, and efficient, and facilitated the integration of culture. Let us not forget about our Indian diaspora who are more connected to the home country and committed to its development. In terms of the annual dollar remittance from developed to developing nation, India scores the top position. And now, does globalization only mean setting up outside foreign companies in India and outsourcing their job? No, we have our NIIT, which is an Indian multinational having offices in abroad, and it is set to a $1 billion revenue growth. And now with globalization, India has always led globalization from the time of GATT treaty, and it has also led the path how it can combine the benefits of globalization with the principle of a welfare state and without compromising the benefits of the larger masses. And when we talk about the global poor, we must also keep in mind that some of the largest philanthropic body all over the world, like the Gates Foundation, were the early pioneers of globalization worldwide. With that, I want to conclude that globalization has been beneficial overall. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Thanks to all the speakers. You have put forward your points in a very succinct and in a very convincing manner. This brings us to round 2, which is known as the rebuttal round. In this round, the two teams are going to direct questions at each other based on what the other team just proposed. The questions can be directed to a particular speaker or to the team as a whole, okay? So the first question will come from the faculty team towards the students. Just before you start, this round is for 15 minutes. Please keep your questions concise and to the point, and same for answers, so that we can accommodate the maximum number of questions within this time span. Both teams will be scored by the judges, both on the quality of questions as well as answers. Thank you.
Okay. Questions. Actually, honestly, I have to say the acoustics of the hall is very poor. I could not hear much about what you said, and you spoke so fast. But I realized that you are trying to put blame on the MNCs for capturing worldwide and causing inequality to every part. That's what basically the first person says. And the second person also talks about inequality and in open market, downside of open market. Third one, I couldn't really hear much, but I believe that you also talk about same line. Now my question, before I ask you a direct question, my question to you is, have you seen these 3 movies from 3 era? One is Avatar by James Cameron, 2010. One is Do Bigha Zameen by Bimal Roy, 1953. Third one is Modern Times, Chaplin, 1934. Have you seen those movies, any of those? You haven't. The point is there, all of these movies talks about inequality. In one case, Avatar, an MNC going to a Pandora and looting everything they can, trying to loot. It's much like Cowboy versus Indians, and then Pheasant, Do Bigha Zameen. So this inequality is a part of human history. Can globalization be blamed for this?
Right. While we do agree that inequality is something that has existed generationally, we think that it is fair for us to go ahead and say that globalization has made it significantly worse. That was the point that was brought forward not only by me, but also by my second speaker. We give you unique mechanizations in my speech as to why exactly, firstly, these multinational corporations have a greater incentive than small businesses and family businesses to go ahead and exploit things like human rights. Secondly, them getting a massive amount of power and money through things like globalization has enabled them to go ahead and do human rights abuses that go ahead and push inequality even further than it did before on a scale we have never seen before. We think it's fair for our side to go ahead and then say that if globalization is something that has made inequality worse in a way that we've never seen before, then we think that that is something regrettable, and that was the stance that we took.
Your question to the other team.
Right. So this is a question that's concerning what the honorable second speaker mentioned, but we'll take an answer from any of the three speakers. Given that there is a huge amount of discourse about this affluent middle class, let's actually deal with that for a second. Right from our first speech, we give you analysis on the right to work. How people are often told that you cannot ask for a wage increase because if you do, we will move this entire industry to a place where we can afford to pay the people less, because obviously paying someone in the United States to do the same tech job as paying someone in Bangalore person is probably cheaper. This means that people cannot ask for wage rises. This leads to wage insecurity. Is it better now? All right. So I'll repeat the question. It's regarding the affluent middle class analysis that was brought forward by your team. We give you analysis on why wage insecurity is directly caused by globalization for the simple reason that when you have access to new labor markets, which is something you didn't have before globalization, you can now threaten workers by saying that if you ask for a pay rise, we will move the industries elsewhere. And this is something that has happened. Given that these people don't have transferable skills, they have two options. This is something that's already been stated, right? Either take terrible wages or go unemployed. Obviously, they take the option with terrible wages. This means that wages do not rise as fast as inflation, which means prices rise faster than wages can, and people in the middle class who generally live paycheck to paycheck, who already struggle to
Just
make
ask
ends.
your question.
Yeah.
You're putting forward your points.
Oh, yeah. So essentially, given that like the analysis you've already given you has directly contradicted this affluent middle class, is it safe for us to assume that a large part of the case that's put forward is not actually about the middle class, but about a secure minority which is not representative of the large majority of people in India?
Okay, so let me take the question. So if I have understood correctly, that whether the claim that we are making that globalization has led to an affluent middle class, whether it is a significant middle class or not, and whether they can have the power to negotiate their wages. So actually, when we talk about wages, we cannot really compare what is a wage in terms of the Indian currency and US currency, because these two currencies are inherently different. So in the same line, we have a different definition for what constitutes the below poverty line for India and for some other countries. And when it comes to the affluent middle class, it is actually true that it has created affluent middle class, because I don't believe the proposition that they don't have transferable skill sets are right. It may only be true for a very few super specialization, and for that sake they also find jobs abroad. So globalization does not only mean that the foreign companies need to set up their offices in India. It also means that we now have a very affluent Indian diaspora whom I think they will identify themselves with the upper middle class, and for the in general middle class part, they have lots of skill sets where they find employments in the different services sector. So, thank you.
Okay.
I just
You can
would
go
like
with
to add one point. Don't forget that the Tata is also buying Jaguar. Okay? So that is also happening due to globalization.
Next question from the faculty team to the student team, please.
Okay, so the students team mentions that development is evicting people from their land, from their homes, and also they have also mentioned about the exploitation and corruption by the capitalistic system. Now my question is that, can we hold globalization responsible for this, or these are the policy limitations or not forming proper policy to incorporate development at a particular place, or to have a proper system to keep corruption in check? So globalization is not capitalism only, and it is not only about having a development on a particular place, taking someone's land.
Given that this is something that directly deals with my speech, I'll respond and then they'll add on. So while we do agree that corruption and things do exist otherwise, we've also given you analysis on why multinational corporations having access to multiple markets gives them a unique amount of power, a unique amount of political and economic capital to go ahead and lobby politicians by doing things like, say, funding their election campaigns, which is necessary for these politicians. The way that these politicians then go ahead and repay them is by enforcing their political will, something already mentioned in my first speech. Insofar as these multinational corporations have been given this unique power by globalization, they have a unique amount of agency to go ahead and push for these otherwise unpopular policies, because otherwise evicting people is a pretty bad political decision, because people are going to be upset. The only reason politicians take such drastic measures is because they feel like they owe something to these MNCs to keep that funding coming in so they can get re-elected. So globalization has given them a unique amount of agency to go ahead and bend the will of democracies to their own thing, making it fundamentally undemocratic and pushing for the very issues like corruption that you mentioned.
To add on to what he said, I'd also like to point out that the US or the other rich countries that have had a unique sort of interest in actually opening the markets of developing countries for exploitation, for any other sort of purpose also, right? These countries also have had vested interest in opening markets before these developing countries actually had the structures possible, actually had the power structures, actually had the economic structures possible to actually protect their own economy from being exploited, right? The opening of these markets happened before these power structures could actually develop. And so globalization especially in the contemporary world we live in, the globalization we see is and can and should be held responsible for these sorts of things that was asked in the question, ma'am.
Okay. Can we have the students ask the next question to the faculty team?
Given that the teachers team has talked about an affluent middle class, we as the students team have actually come ahead and talked about why, while globalization may create opportunities, it does not ensure that there is equal access for everybody to go ahead and become qualified enough to utilize those opportunities. In the face of that, what happens is the expectations from the global market constantly increases, while these more vulnerable people who are not able to access resources to meet these qualifications become even more irrelevant in the market and get pushed even more into poverty. So in such a case, how do you think does the creation of opportunities really stand beneficial?
Can you repeat that last one? Creation of opportunities, you mean?
How exactly is the creation of opportunities uniform and beneficial?
Excellent. So I would like to tell you that, have you heard a term called brain drain at one point of time? Does it happen now? How many people, how many IIT graduates are now looking for a affluent job and life in abroad and doesn't consider India? Don't you think it's a creation of opportunity and it is a direct result of globalization? At 80s and etc., there was a big, I think, debate that goes on, is that India is producing all these IIT graduates who are now contributing in Silicon Valley and all those places. They are all possibly from that generation. Those same generation, now IIT, they are starting startups and contributing to Indian market. How many of them are really going and starting those startups at abroad? Don't you think this is of course, a side that you should consider when you are talking about creation of opportunities?
I think we can take one more pair of questions. Please be fast and concise. Oh, you were trying to
I'd just like to add that one of the biggest beneficiaries of globalization has been women empowerment. Okay? If you compare the number of women in Indian industry 30 years ago, 35 years ago, it has been a sea change. So women have got equal opportunities in various sectors, and they have been successful primarily due to the internet and the information technology schemes. They could actually set flexible timings so that they can manage home as well as the corporate sector.
Okay, we have to wrap up this round within the next 2.5 minutes. Quickly, one question from this side and one question from other side.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe it will be the same question that you asked her. I wanted to add this point, that many of your questions is something as if like chicken, which comes first, as egg or chicken. So MNCs, you said that of course they are doing inequality and all. I would like to ask you, didn't they do anything good in terms of in that labor law or average buying capacity of average Indians? Don't you think any of this, just to add to his point, the creche or daycare in a company was unthinkable before globalization, before this MNCs came up. They made it mandatory in all of their places. Now Indian companies are also following that same. The corporate social responsibility fund was almost not a norm in those eras. Now it has to be there. All of these changes they did, can it not be taken as the benefit of globalization?
Sir, the main thing about we have to weigh the harms and benefits. We are not denying that there have been no benefits, or there has been no progress associated with the onset of globalization. But as you talked about labor laws and poorer, as you talked about labor laws, these MNCs have huge power to influence the markets and shape the supply chains, and hence they have a lot of power which they can exercise over these developing economies and their government policies. They have this unique lobbying power which they can exercise to make them bend or relax their labor laws so that they can increase their own profit margins, thereby making working conditions even worse for the people who live hand to mouth. So therefore at the sure some progressive values might have got associated, but the point at which we deprive the most vulnerable people from the basic rights, it's actually hypocritical to go ahead and say that significant progress has been made.
Okay, thank you. I think we have to close round 2 here. We have taken up the 15 minutes that was allotted for this. Now that brings us to round 3. So we have gone through round 1 and round 2. Round 3 is the judges Q&A round. And this is where the judges will direct their questions to either of the teams, maybe to a single person or to the team as a whole. Okay? So that round starts now, and I would request the judges to please start their questioning.
Yeah, my question is to the faculty team to start with. A few years ago, we heard about the Make in India movement. And the intention was to indigenize the manufacturing sector. Now, evidently that hasn't really taken off that well, because still we are dependent on imports for a wide variety of different things. And the confidence that the Indian industry has on using domestic products in their manufactured products has still been very low. So do you think that globalization or the presence of or the accessibility of components from all over the world is kind of throttling the growth of the Indian industry?
Okay, so let me take that question, you can add. So, of course, there was Make in India movement, and while it has not gained that much of steam it should have, but there have been significant progress made, significant efforts. Like if today we want to purchase something in e-commerce sites like Amazon, some products, they comes with the tag, that made in India. While it comes to the competence of the Indian products, lots of Indian brands, say for take examples of the platforms like Nykaa, which really made a lot of news. We have lots of homemade brands which are competing very well, particularly when it comes to cosmetics, things like the Mamaearth, Lotus and Nykaa. They are competing very well with the foreign brands like Maybelline and the L'Oreal Paris. So as a result, now the foreign brands also invest in particularly developing product which suits the Indian skin, Indian complexion, and they need to test on the Asian skin. So I think overall it has increased the efficiency of the market. Thank you.
I just like to add to the question, it is indeed true that more promises were made about Make in India scheme, but I think it is the government that has to come up with some policies to boost the manufacturing sector in India. Okay, we are now manufacturing the wheels of Vande Bharat Express, and those are imported from Ukraine, and I think we have the competence of making it in India, provided the government, Indian Railways, has the will to do that. It depends on the government policy and the will of the public sectors to come forward and take it as a challenge to make Indian products for Indian systems.
If I may add one small little to it. Sir, with pardon, I would like to add that you can possibly shorten the line by either removing or drawing a bigger one. So at least globalization told us where we are standing and what we need and how to be competitive and compete with the entire world and develop our own skills. So that's what I think the biggest thing, this connectivity, again I will stress on that happened, that only prompted us to this Make in India. We realized that we don't have it. So then only this realization has to come. Then only we can possibly move forward.
My question is to the students team. Globalization means transfer of ideas, transfer of people, transfer of money, transfer of resources. Now my question to all of you, should Government of India ban all Indian students to go abroad for higher studies as well as stop attracting students from other countries to come and study in India?
No, we do not agree that the government of India should go ahead and ban influx of students into the country and students from here going outside to study. But what our major point was that globalization has increased, the global market has a lot of high expectations for which a person needs to meet some pretty high qualifications, and only when a person is skilled enough do they get a chance in the global market. And therefore a lot of the times the people who are able to make use of these opportunities in the first place to go to abroad and study or to go and work there are the people who originally belonged to the affluent middle class, are the people who enjoyed some sort of economic or social capital in the past days and do currently enjoy it. These are not the people who belong to the lowest strata of the society who are able to utilize these benefits, while the standards keep on increasing every day, and hence these people now are ousted from their own jobs, thus pushing them back into further poverty, thus not allowing them to go ahead and try to learn these skills simply because they have even lesser resources now, thus making it even more difficult to go go ahead and re-participate in the labor force. And for all these reasons, we do not believe that India should go ahead and ban, but we have proved why globalization in itself has caused a lot of harm to the, while it has created a lot of opportunities, it has not at the same time ensured that there is access to utilize these opportunities to all the people uniformly.
Just to very quickly add on to what was said, our team's stance was never that globalization has no benefits. We are perfectly happy to concede that there are some real benefits to globalization. What we believe this debate actually is about is whether the harms that were brought forward by globalization, are they better or worse or more important than the benefits? So maybe commenting on things like whether the government of India should or shouldn't ban students, in isolation probably we would say no, they shouldn't. But should the government of India ban students if it meant that all of the other harms of globalization like slave labor, child labor and stuff would cease to exist? Then we would probably be pretty happy to say yes.
Next question.
My question is to the faculty team that as globalization is about connectivity and exchange of technologies and ideas across various markets. So basically what is happening that everyone is getting a very broad platform and we have new players coming up through globalization across various markets, which basically, also increases the competition across markets. As a result, the small players are not able to at times cope up with this competition that is growing with time. So what are your opinions about that?
Yeah, question to the faculty team.
Competition is an essential part in the life. I don't know, again, I'm drawing reference from movies because I'm a movie buff. If you have seen the movie called Three Idiots, and remember the speech that principal was telling about the coil egg, it's the part of the life. Hard fact, it's very hard to sort of, we can put it aside and say, no, there could be equality. It is the competitive market, it's a global market. Basically, we should take it, my perspective about that, if you ask me honestly, my perspective is that you should take it positively. If you take it positively and believe that this competition can improve our standards, our products, our contribution towards the world, if we have this conviction and if we have this confidence, then this competition is basically going in favor of us as Indian or as a human race, if you think. The space race happened because of that satellites are there. Okay, so it wouldn't happen if human beings would just concentrate on the land and or the sea on this staying on this earth. It only happened because there was two superpowers fighting for each other. That's why now we are thinking beyond even moon and landing in the Mars. So competition is an essential part of the life. Globalization just possibly gives a platform to fight. That's it I have to say in this.
My question to the student team. So I think there is a little bit of thin line which divides what you are saying and the ill effects of capitalism. Because all the points that you mentioned regarding the exploitation, etc., is true for any capitalistic society. In fact, there are similar arguments have been used in the context of some of our own Indian IT companies where fresh graduates are hired with very modest salaries. It is also true that there are companies in China which have been accused of significant human rights violation, even though they are indigenous companies. They have not come from elsewhere. And on the other side of it, when I look at it as a consumer, I see that the globalization actually brings in a lot of brands, increases the competition and drives the prices down. So for me, I get my toothpaste, my toothbrush at a much lesser cost than it would have happened if I had only one monopolized company and they are not, selling as per their whims and there's no competition. So how would you react to this line of thought?
So the question has two parts. We'll deal with them sequentially. So in the first part, we do agree that there is a pretty thin line between capitalism and globalization's harms. What we will say, though, is that all of the harms that we mention with things like capitalism, like the indigenous companies going ahead and offering very low salaries to graduates, is made significantly worse by globalization. Because while you can say these things like, oh, we're going to offer you modest salaries because you have no other option to graduates, you can't say that to the more experienced people, the people who need life security because they likely have expenses like raising a family and mortgages and things like that. But in a world where globalization exists, that company can now go ahead and say, even at 35, if you are not willing to stick to this wage, we're just going to outsource your job, which is a unique harm that is brought to the table because of globalization. And we think that that unique harm differentiates the harms of capitalism from globalization. We agree it is a thin line, but once you cross this line, it becomes exponentially worse. But on the second point of consumerism, we do agree that while more options come in, your purchasing power as a consumer depends on how much money you make. Given that we've already shown you that wages are not going to rise fast enough to deal with things like inflation which occur because all of the world's economies are now tied, this means that as a consumer, even if there are more options on the table, there's less purchasing power for you to go ahead and actually avail those options. What's the point of 100 options on the shelf if you can only afford one? That's what we would like to posit.
My question again to the student team. I'm asking probably a little more question to the student team because I saw you all are very passionate and the greatest globalization today is the emergence, the mixing of ideas. Everybody is learning from each other, and that's greatly happening because of the internet. Should internet be banned, stopped? Should internet be stopped at all? Everywhere in the world there should be no internet. When there is no internet, no Google, no Edge, no Internet Explorer, no transfer of ideas. We remain cocooned in our own society, not knowing what is happening elsewhere in the world. So my question to all of you is, should internet be stopped all over the world?
Ma'am, again, as was the previous question, this is also kind of subjective, because as in the previous question we stated, we are against globalization. We are just taking the team stance that globalization has done much more harms than actually than it has done good for a subset of people, for people at large, for some countries, for many countries also. Right? Because we have talked about the human rights violations that globalization exclusively caused. Right? Not the human rights violations that existed under capitalism only, but globalization also brought in many more exclusive human rights violations. We talked about the economics. We talked about all those also. Right? And as such, should the internet be banned? Again, is a no when it's taken in a bubble. When you take the internet as just an exchange of ideas without any other intervening factors such as the companies that drive internet, the ISPs, internet service providers, them actually imposing some certain conditions over your country if they are MNCs again, right? Without all those external factors weighing into this decision, should internet be banned? No, it shouldn't. But when we consider these external factors also, these external MNCs, these external big agents, big tech, all these big companies who come in and impose restrictions, who come in and impose such violations, such exploitative measures, that is a point when we do say that internet should be banned, because that internet means that there is going to be an exploitation of human rights, and that human rights can never be violated in any case whatsoever. And that is our team stance.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other questions from the judges? One. Okay, we are already above over time, so maybe quickly.
think I have fallen in love with all three of you, so that's why again I'm asking another question. So, you mentioned about equity, unequal society MNCs are creating. My question to all of you is that, was India an equitable society in terms of not only money, but in terms of the casteism, what we saw in earlier days, which to great extent, in my view, has gone down, whatever could be the reason. But do you think when we did not have globalization, when I don't know, because I always felt that there is globalization. So maybe 100, 200 years ago, when we did not have so-called globalization, India had a very strong caste system. Do you think at that point in time, India was an equitable society?
Of course not. We don't think that India was an equitable society. I think a lot of people in this room would argue that India still is largely not an equitable society on those same grounds. What we will say, though, is we don't necessarily see the dependence of things like social movements and all of these wonderful NGOs that go ahead and push for social change being dependent on things like globalization. We think that for centuries we've seen groups push forward change. Probably the entirety of human history's worth of change up until the 1950s was brought without globalization. So we don't necessarily see this dependence on globalization for progress. We think that this change would have probably happened regardless.
Thank you. Thank you. And that brings us to the end of the 3 rounds of debate, the judges' Q&A round as well. So we will now request the judges to quickly compile their scores and tell us the results. There is a prize for the winning team, and then there's a prize for the best speaker. So while the judges are compiling the scores and coming up with their decisions, so this is out of competition. Is any from the audience like to throw your questions to one of the teams? Okay, Professor Joyanta Mukhopadhyay, yes.
Yeah, I have 2 questions, I think, which in some way about inequality. Now, one of the measure of inequality is Gini index, you know that. And if you consider the Gini index of India particularly before globalization. Can you repeat? So I'm talking about Gini index, which says that about percentage of people who are under that, or rather the opposite is that how many percentage of people are having the certain more wealth of the society. It's a kind of inequality in that measure. Okay, there's a curve, and higher the number, higher the inequality. So, for example, if sub-Saharan countries in Africa, the number is about, say, 0.52 or something like that. India, it is now 0.49, and it was 0.33 or 0.24 in 92, 93. Now, so this is one thing. Like, do you think that globalization is a cause for that? That is one thing. Or is it not that fact that it is happening? Second question is that the sovereignty of countries. See, whether sovereignty of countries are also getting affected, because you know that all colonization, that we have the history of colonization. Can you consider colonization is also globalization? Because you see that people are coming from outside, and they are also saying, now we are competing. They can give the same slogan. The same slogan can be given in the name of globalization also. So can you not do, what is your reflection on that? So these are the.
May I? Yeah, thank you for bringing this. I realized 2 things in there, and one is the index, and second one is inequality. I'd like to answer this. Number 1, about the index, there could be various values. I just wanted to remind that Bhutan doesn't have any GDP. They wanted to believe that happiness index. That's one. Second thing about inequality, my point in favor of globalization is it's pretty similar to managing a MTech class consisting of 30 people versus a first-year class consisting of 300 students. There will be a broad spectrum. The more the people gets connected, the more inequality is going to happen. So this is an inevitable side effect, I would say, about globalization. It exists definitely, and maybe more and more will be seen. But whether it is directly to be blamed on globalization, or is it the main thing that globalization is doing, I think that will be a little too harsh to put the entire blame on this connectivity and globalization.
So if I can just add to it, so India is also not doing very good in the global hunger index. So can we hold globalization responsible for that? Due to globalization, due to technology, we are not seeing any shortage or any downturn in our food production. So is it more of a policy framing or globalization? And then again, can we call like colonialism as globalization? The thing is, just like the students team has said, we are not saying globalization has done only good, but what we are trying to say that its benefits are outweighing the harms or the downsides of globalization. So thank you.
Thank you. Yep. All right.
Good evening. So my question is to the faculty team. So myself, Guhan Priyadarshana, I'm a research scholar. According to me, globalization is actually a sport played out in an uneven playground where one team, which I consider as the first world country, has an upper hand over the third world country. For example, globalization as an ideology is actually pushed forward by the first world country, because they are the ones who reap the benefits of it. The moment this power dynamics is shifted, in which they are in the receiving end, they are the ones who put forth the protectorate measures. It has happened historically. In 1980s, Japan was going through this bubble, and it was about to surpass USA as the economic powerhouse. And then USA introduced some protectorate measures. It has happened in the very recent past between USA and China. The new tariffs were imposed on the products imported from the respective markets. And we have also seen this played out during the pandemic, right? So, COVID pandemic in itself is actually the product of globalization. Yeah, it's actually the product of globalization. This epidemic which started, it became a pandemic because of globalization, because just like ideas and goods, the disease also transported from one place to the other. But the moment, when the vaccines were manufactured, which were, kind of in its nascent stage, the protectorate measures were imposed. They were not ready to talk about globalization, about supplying the medicines to the third world countries, which were also affected by the first world countries. So globalization in itself is an unequal playground where the first world countries has the upper hand over the third world countries. So naturally, for a subject of the third world country, so this is my point. Do you agree with this? That's actually the question, yeah.
Okay, so I believe what you are saying, globalization as an ideology and the first world countries pushing their case is more of a free market economy and not globalization exactly, because India has a rich heritage of doing trades all over the world from ancient times. Now we are hearing lots of arguments about like smaller players are getting disadvantaged, but also it is also the case that globalization has created open source knowledge, open source data, open source information. So smaller players, indigenous firms, they are the direct beneficiaries of that. And even some data are IP protected. The big firms, due to competition, due to globalization, they have to make provision that some of the knowledge that they have discovered can be utilized by others without any significant cost increments. So I think it is essential to understand that globalization has a broader definition than any one particular type of economy, any one form of capitalism, or any one form of policy decision. So thank you.
Yeah, if I can very quickly, on that first world and third world thing, because this is something I strongly believe that it's a 400-meter race. If you see that 400-meter race, people in the outer track starts a little ahead of people in the inner track. So I believe that we are running that race, and we are going to be there in that first world country sometime soon, because the power center always shifts. It shifted from Europe to US, it shifted from US to Japan, it shifted from Japan to China. Who knows, the next one will be India. Globalization is giving us this track to run and be equal to all this first world country. This is my strong belief. So I am like to take it as that way.
I think the judges are ready with their results. So I would request the judges to please come on stage, and one of them to announce the results. And I would also request Professor Joyanto Mukhopadhyay, our Dean Outreach, to please come on stage and give away the prizes.
So we really had a very interesting debate among the faculty members and our students. The competition was really close, and unanimously, all the three judges, after their evaluation, we have found that the young KGPians, outraced the faculty members by small points, and they won the debate. But it was a very close competition, and we also thank the faculty members to take out time and be part of this debate competition. Would you like to add something?
Can we have the prizes for the winning team? Winning team.
No, if you want to add something.
No, I don't want to add.
Should we best debated also?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hold on to the best speaker. Sure. Let's get the prizes first.
I don't mind announcing the best debater.
You can.
Sure. Okay, the best debater. So the whole student team as well as the faculty team put forward it very nicely, very enthusiastically. But one person's enthusiasm, I think, was par excellence. It was infectious, if I can say, in the day of pandemic. So he's none other than Asle Placid. In fact, three of us unanimously agreed that he deserves this Best Debater Award.
Congratulations to all the participants and the winning team.
Now I would like to request our judges, our Dean Outreach, to give the prize to the first runner-up, to the faculty team, that is.
Nobody goes empty-handed.
Next, I would like to request our alumni present here Mr. Pankaj Kumar Singh, Mr. Raja Venkat to come on this stage along with Dean Outreach to felicitate our judges. Lastly, I would like to request our Dean Outreach along with the alumni to felicitate to our today's moderator, Professor Anandru Bhattacharya. So, thank you audience. There is a tea break for 45 minutes. So after that, at the same place, there will be a cultural program. So I would like to request all of you to come back to this place again. Dot at 5:45, it is going to be started. Thank you very much.